Chapter 6. Every human being has a unique vision of his creator. I was acting out of character by calling off an appointment, but I needed to clear my head. The other client I had scheduled for that day would have to wait. I reviewed the video of the session, focusing on the points during which it seemed James was reading my mind. I found no evidence of skullduggery. When Barry arrived home from the bank, I ambushed him with questions about giants and dwarves and minotaurs. He asked if I was sniffing fairy dust again. He was barely inside the doorway at that point. He was heading through the corner of the living room past the large fireplace under the cathedral ceiling when I rewound and started again. Do you know anything about Vishnu? You might want to ask Fritz. He knows things about things like that. Well, you're very helpful, Barry, I said as I turned away. Reading my mind, or hearing my thoughts, Barry mumbled, "Sarcasm. It's what's for dinner." Barry was in the habit of showering after work. He said that our house had one smell, quite pleasant, he always added, and that the bank had a significantly different odor. The two scents didn't mingle well, he insisted. The closet was a kind of airlock between his professional and his personal lives. When the closet door opened, I could smell the bank. Barry had always had four suit coats with matching slacks and two additional sport coats which have always been completely out of style with bold suede patches on the elbows. These held the scent of the bank like musty sponges. Every jacket in the closet held a single crisp C note. Barry has a strange mental disorder. Well, that's what I call it. About having cash on hand. He never liked to switch from coin to promissory notes, and less so the change from notes to plastic. He believes in the tangibility of cash. A dollar is a dollar, he always said. Paper is paper, and plastic is only binary code and some data storage hardware somewhere underground. With $100 in each jacket, Barry was ensured financial freedom on a daily basis. He could afford 24 hours of gasoline and food until he could get home and change jackets. As Barry showered off the stale scents of the ancient mahogany, new carpet, and indelible ink, I telephoned our only child, Frederick. "Fritzy," I said into the receiver, "it's your doting mother calling." "Yes, mother, I know," Frederick said faux sardonically. "You have your own ringtone." "Oh, what is it?" "Everybody was kung fu fighting," Frederick said flatly. He paused and laughed a wholehearted laughter. "What do you want from me, you overbearing woman? Did I not send a card on your last birthday?" And that was the sense of humor my husband and I gave to our only child. I laughed about the ringtone and then soberly addressed the question of the card. "Well, my adoring and ever vigilant son, you didn't have to include my age on the card and on the front cover." I waited for his comeback, but it was absent, so I continued. "I know you have a lot of experience with world religions and philosophies, and I wondered if you can enlighten me about Vishnu." "Well, mother of mine, I focused my grad school work on the Orient, but I dealt mostly with Japanese and Korean creation myths, like crossing a bridge and looking into the waters, that kind of thing. Listen, I'll be at the library tomorrow afternoon. Can you meet me there at, say, 2? "It's a date." "No, it's an appointment. Lori doesn't like me to have dates anymore. I guess my marriage precludes them. Who knew?" I was still laughing as we said our goodbyes, and I placed the handset on the base. That boy of mine is quite a riot. A weird amalgam of his father and me. Amalgam of his father and me? A combination? I know what the word means. The next day arrived and I had no appointment, so I spent my time working up a manuscript that I'd been putting together for a number of years. I thought of my dad for some reason whenever I worked on the book. Although the material was familiar and I knew the direction I wanted to go, it was a children's book about hypnosis. I couldn't focus enough attention to make it happen. My mind was fixed on Vishnu. My late breakfast became an early lunch, and the midday hours stretched on to forever. 2 o'clock arrived, and I waited at the library for my son. The old hardwood table at which I sat reminded me of Barry's work. Old and solid, I thought as I lightly rapped on the tabletop with my knuckles, as a financial institution or a library ought to be. Frederick was notorious for arriving exactly on time for everything. That was his father's influence, of course. Frederick always said that being early is as inconvenient for the host as being late. If told to meet at 3:23 p.m., one ought to arrive at 3:23, not a minute before or a minute after. I was thinking about all this as I watched the digital clock on my cell phone turn to 2 exactly. Looking up from my timepiece, I saw before me my Fritzy. Right on time, I said with a smile. Frederick leaned down and hugged me warmly and said that I should expect nothing less. I took a moment to note that his childhood freckles were disappearing into adulthood. His green eyes were still marvelous under his red locks, however. He wore a button-down collar, but no tie. His cuffs were loosely rolled, and all this gave him the look of a man who had put in a full day's work at the office. Fritz, I have an urgent need to learn more about Vishnu. I need to know who he was and how he lived. I need to know what made him tick. Wait a minute, Mother. Just ease back on the reins a bit. First of all, Vishnu wasn't a man, but a god. In fact, he wasn't only a god, but a goddess as well. He was complete, like the yin and the yang of China, the Aiki of Japan, and the Shonji of Korea. What are you talking about, son? Frederick led me to the reference section of the library as we spoke, walking past quiet students and librarians who looked like they were born to be librarians. I was amused by my surroundings. The students were anxious to get out of the library and to use their cell phones. The librarians must all visit the same eye doctor. Yes, sir, Mr. Optometrist, I'd very much like the same horn-rimmed glasses as Mrs. Tuttle, I could hear in my mind's ear. Frederick, interrupt my thoughts. Here it is, the Dictionary of the Deities. It will give you the basic information from which you can launch your search. I took the rather large book in hand. It was heavy. I leafed through a few dozen pages. The print was microscopic. Are you kidding me? I placed the reference book on the nearest table and asked my overeducated son, what did you mean by complete? What's a Chonzi? Never mind the Shanzi and the Aikai. They represent the marriage of up and down, heaven and earth. They mean all of creation. What you need to understand is that Vishnu is not like your Mesopotamian god. He is not only male. He did not need a trinity to create the world, nor a duality. He needed no wife, though he took one. Vishnu was part of a trinity, that's true, but he was not dependent upon either parts in order to complete his tasks. Frederick was studying my face as I looked down at the book on the table. I looked back up at my son, but my question just wouldn't come to mind. His red hair was electric with some kind of gel, but he looked quite professional, only appropriately useful. And he wasn't mortal, Mother. He was immortal. He is immortal. He's still being worshipped. But he may be occupying a mortal body. He may have occupied one in the past, or many, I quickly exclaimed. My son paused, and we both felt as though our familial relationship had reversed. He was educating and parenting me. You don't think you're possessed, do you, Mother? Fritz smiled sideways, and his eyes sparkled. Maybe a poltergeist, he added for good measure. Well, you see, Frederick, I'm concerned about your father. I laughed, and Frederick laughed with me, and a woman in black-rimmed glasses shushed us. It was a memory worth making. I told my only son to give my love to Lori, and Frederick left the building, saying he had already ordered the book he needed from the interlibrary loan. He made sure I understood that one resource was not adequate if I wanted to get a clear view of who Vishnu is to his worshippers. There are as many gods as there are worshippers, Mother. Every human being has a unique vision of its creator. No matter how standardized the religion or the service, each adherent will have a unique perspective on the divine. I remember this to be his parting words. I'm glad his Ivy League education was not wasted, and I liked the spiky red hair. Wearing my green slacks and rubber-soled shoes, I beelined it for the children's section and asked the woman at the desk for the best children's book on Vishnu. She walked me to a bookcase full of paperbacks covered with primary colors. This one is designed to be read by 5-year-olds, she told me. Perfect, I replied as I snatched it from her hands. I had learned long ago that the best synopsis for any topic is a children's book. The authors dispense with the jargon, rhetoric, and scholarly nonsense. I glanced at the librarian as I turned away, noticing her raised eyebrow at the conveyed condescension, but I chose to ignore it. I sat down with a pad and a pencil, a huge reference book that I barely opened, and a beloved children's book with a 4-armed hermaphrodite on the cover. I was ready to be enlightened. Taking a deep breath, I dove in. To summarize what I learned, Vishnu is the Supreme Lord. Why did that sound familiar? He is the protector of creation and the restorer of moral order. His name means all-pervading. Reading further, I was amazed at what I was learning. Vishnu is often shown reclining or asleep because he is awaiting the next annihilation and renewal of the world. My jaw dropped and I reread the passage. Did James know this? Did he plan to execute a great hoax in my office? Was I the butt of his joke? I didn't believe so. As for physical description of Vishnu's, they range from one end of the spectrum to the other. Did he have 2 arms or 4? Was he ivory white in color or royal blue? Was he fierce or was he docile? And then there was the matter of multiple incarnations. Sometimes he wasn't a person at all. I decided not to bother with the physical descriptions, but to get to the root of his personality. I wanted to know what part of Vishnu's life was affecting James. Next, I found before me on the open page a perfect representation of the knot that James had tied. Vishnu's emblem is a knot which symbolizes life without beginning or end. I felt the knot in my stomach as I remembered the knot that I had held in my hand. I swallowed hard as there was a knot in my throat as well. He had given me physical evidence. One of the incarnations of Vishnu is the warrior priest Parashurama. That should make James happy, I thought. Reading the entire children's book cover to cover, I still could not comprehend the complexity of Vishnu. I took notes on his entry in the dictionary of the deities, and I checked out a small children's paperback, and I made special note of Vishnu's confrontation with Bavaria. When the next session with James arrived, I would be prepared with questions. Vishnu would not catch me off guard again. I greeted James in the usual way. I ushered him into the love seat, started the camera recording, and took my place in the Paisley armchair. As I removed my shoes and felt the carpet with my toes, James spoke. "What are we going to do this time, Ruby?" James asked. "I'm going to ask you to go back into the same past life as last session, James. It shouldn't be too difficult. People often revisit the same past life or same missing time scenario multiple times. The difference this time is that you don't remember what you told me last time. I have to admit that I'm excited about that." "Well, let's hope it's worth the price of admission," James said with a smile. I ran through the typical induction, being particularly careful that I had fully induced a hypnotic state in James. When I was satisfied that he was under, I told him to try and see the same door as the last session. When he could see it, I instructed James to enter through the door to the same past life we had earlier discussed. "Hello, Ruby," James said, and I was caught off guard. "Well, hello," I replied. "To whom am I speaking?" "That's getting a bit old, don't you think, Ruby?" James said. "I am Vishnu, son of Vyavashvata. My mother is Kali, the great mother." "Where are you, Vishnu?" I asked. "I am walking on the streets of gold in my submarine city, Ruby. But you know that. What you want to know is about the Bhairava. Am I right?" A bolt of lightning shot through my body and stole my breath. Even if James was putting me on, how could he have known that I had studied Vishnu's confrontation with the Bhairava? In an attempt to regain control of the session, I cleared my throat and insisted, "No, Vishnu. I want to talk about your city first, and then we can get to the Bhairava." "Very well, Ruby. But pretty competition for control of the conversation is unlike you. This character flaw only illustrates your fear of the unknown." A thought of my father flashed through my mind. I had to admit Vishnu was right, but I continued nonetheless. Tell me more about your city. Describe your surroundings for me and report what you see. It is all as I command, Ruby. The city was built to my specifications. I have gold beneath my feet, marble to support my roof, and diamonds everywhere I look. The city is polished and it shines with red of rubies, greens of emeralds, blue of sapphires, and the whole spectrum of divided light from a prism of diamonds all around me. But why? I asked. Why jewels and gold? Why not? He answered. I have taken from the surface that which I deem beautiful and value. I have surrounded myself with the images that bring me comfort, pride, and memories of victories over fallen ones. Who lives in your city, Vishnu? Certainly it is a home to more than just you. My city is home to thousands of my people. They are my subjects, giving me authority over them. In your time, many thousand years in the future, the city remains populated by descendants of my people. What year is it? I asked. Ha! What year indeed? And do you measure years by the Earth's revolution about the sun? Do you start your calendar with the supposed virgin birth, the immaculate conception of a savior god? In solar years, I lived in my undersea metropolis. I said that weird. More than 12,000 years ago. I felt like a tree stump, unable to speak or to even think. I scratched lightly at my scalp, but I found no reply. My reign was absolute because I was compassionate as well as intolerant. The two are not mutually exclusive, Ruby. The warrior priest, I said aloud. Correct. What about Bhararava? Scoundrel, James' voice said as his temperature spiked and his nostril flared. I could understand his penchant for war, but not his lust for blood. We often dabbled in human endeavors, starting and ending wars as much as your world leaders do today, but he was insatiable, drinking the blood of fallen warriors. Finally, I took my trusted steel, my sword called the Nandaka, in hand, and it is a sacred sword, dear to my people as a symbol of swift justice and an end to mindless destruction. I raised it against the Bhararava. I lifted it high and I brought it down harshly against my own head. Blood poured from the wound because, yes, we were mortals, Bhararava and I stared at the tyrant through the streams of my own flowing blood, and I said in a voice as thunderous as his own war whoops, I will quench your thirst with my blood, my dear Bhararava. Please pity the humans and stop this madness. James's skin went slack as he talked, as though he was remembering Vishnu's trauma. It took a very long time for Bhararava to decide. I fainted from the loss of blood collapsing at his feet, and he gathered me into his arms and he carried me to my bed, where he assigned a maiden to nurse me back to health. He promised never to unleash hell on earth as long as I could maintain relative peace between peoples and balance in nature. With the advent of your nuclear age, I fear the end may be near. I was treading water in the turbulent waters of his story, but then the importance of his words settled me. The chaos of my mind stopped and all was perfectly still. Are you saying that the end is near? I asked. I'm saying, Ruby, that the natural consequence of reckless behavior is total destruction of planet, another annihilation, and renewal. Without human race as you know it, I will not stand in the way of Bhararava, Kuvera, or the others. Wait, I cut in. Who is the Kuvera? I was no longer maintaining the calm that is important in sessions. Kuvera is for another time, Ruby. Ask me something else. I contemplated for a moment and decided to ask about the end of the world. Before I could pose the question, Vishnu interrupted my thoughts. You humans always want to know about the end of the world. It's a strange preoccupation with you people. Each meets its end alone. The destruction of the planet or the desertification of it, to be more precise, will not concern you when it comes. But isn't desertification a natural disaster rather than war? A natural disaster is an act of God, is it not? And besides, war and desertification are not exclusive to one another. Why can't war, famine, disease, and climate change all coincide? I was lost at the contemplation of his words. We are not truly gods. We are not gods any more than you are, Ruby. What? You are a god to a dog, a horse, or a cow. You can start and extinguish fires. You can erect fences and tear them down. You can work latches that baffle the livestock. In your age, you have electric lights. Is this not the workings of a god if you are but a brutish beast? And are you but a brutish beast to our people? Essentially, we are the same. We have the same universal soul. We all commune with the cosmos. We all tap into the power behind the cosmic manifestations. The sun, the moon, you and I are all expressions of the same energy. Christians call it the Holy Spirit. Humans defied by my people because we could start and extinguish fires. We could fly when you could not. We were not only canonized, but we became the objects of your worship. Yes, as Vishnu, I was mortal, but I was alien to this planet. I lived 1,000 years before I died. James sat still in his love seat. I have so many questions, I admitted. James has been under for quite some time already, Vishnu said. There will be further opportunity. Vishnu said his goodbye, and I began the process of waking James. I was breathless as I brought him back. Ruby, James said, as he opened his clear green eyes. Are you okay? You don't seem yourself. James's honesty always reflected his empathy. The room appeared somehow brighter, as though I, too, had been under hypnosis. I'm fine, James, I said as I fanned myself. Now, tell me, what do you remember from today's session? Only the door, Ruby. It's like I can't see what lies on the other side. Did I talk? Did the regression work? Oh, it worked, James, I said, still breathless. It worked. Little did I know that this was, indeed, the tip of the proverbial iceberg.